I'm sitting here this morning looking through my old photo albums, and I keep coming back to this one picture. It's black and white, a little faded around the edges, and it shows a tiny house with white shutters and a picket fence that was falling apart. That house cost us $12,000 in 1963. $12,000. I have to laugh when I think about it now. I'm Harold, and I'm 82 years old. And that little house on Cherry Lane was the beginning of everything good that happened in my life. Let me tell you about it, because buying that house taught me more about life than any book or teacher ever did. It was 1963, and I was 25 years old, working as a mechanic at Patterson's garage downtown. Made $68 a week, which felt like a fortune back then. My wife Betty was 23, and we'd been living in her mother's basement for 2 years, saving every penny we could. 2 years of whispering conversations so we wouldn't wake anyone, of tiptoeing around someone else's house, of dreaming about having our own front door key. Betty worked part-time at the Five and Dime, making $22 a week. Together we were bringing home about $90 a week, which was decent money for young folks. But we had big dreams and a small bank account. We'd saved up $800 total. That's all we had in the world. I remember the day we first saw the house. Betty had been walking through different neighborhoods on her lunch breaks, just looking at for sale signs. She came home that Tuesday evening with her eyes all bright and said, "Harold, I found it. I found our house." The next day was my day off, so we drove over to Cherry Lane. It was a working-class neighborhood, nothing fancy. The house was small, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen you could barely turn around in, and a living room that felt cozy rather than cramped. The whole place couldn't have been more than 800 square feet. But here's what I remember most about that first visit. The way Betty stood in that tiny kitchen and said, "This is where we'll have our coffee every morning." The way she touched the windowsill in the bedroom and said, "I can put plants here." The way she walked through each room like she was already arranging furniture in her mind. The asking price was $12,800. The real estate agent, a man named Mr. Fisher, who wore the same brown suit every time we saw him, he looked at us like we were kids playing house, which I suppose we were. He kept asking if our parents were going to co-sign, if we had family helping with the down payment, that sort of thing. We told him we had $800 saved and steady jobs. He shook his head and said, "Son, banks want 20% down. That's over $2,000, plus you'll need money for closing costs, inspections, moving expenses." He said it like he was explaining basic arithmetic to children. I'll never forget driving home that day. Betty was quiet, staring out the passenger window. Finally she said, "Maybe we should wait a few more years, save more money." But there was something in her voice that told me she didn't really want to wait. Neither did I. That weekend, I had an idea. I called Mr. Fisher and asked if the owners might consider owner financing. See, I'd learned from fixing cars that sometimes the most complicated problems have simple solutions if you're willing to think differently. Turns out the owners were an elderly couple, the Kowalskis, who were moving to Florida to be near their daughter. They'd already bought their retirement home down there and were carrying 2 mortgages. They needed to sell, but the house had been on the market for 4 months without any solid offers. Mr. Fisher arranged a meeting, and we sat in their living room on a Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Kowalski served coffee and homemade cookies, and Mr. Kowalski told us stories about the house. How he'd built the back porch himself, how they'd raised 3 children there, how Mrs. Kowalski had had a victory garden during the war. I looked them in the eye and made an offer. "We'll pay you $12,000, $800 down, and we'll pay you $250 a month until it's paid off. No bank, no complications, just us to you." I explained that I was a steady worker, that Betty was reliable, that we just wanted a chance to prove ourselves. Mrs. Kowalski looked at her husband, and they had one of those silent conversations that married couples have. Then Mr. Kowalski said, "Son, what happens if you lose your job? What happens if you can't make the payments?" I said, "Mr. Kowalski, then you get your house back, and you keep whatever we've paid you. But I promise you, I won't lose my job, and I won't miss a payment. This house means too much to us, too." They took 3 days to think about it. 3 days that felt like 3 months. When Mr. Fisher called and said they'd accepted our offer, Betty started crying right there in her mother's kitchen. Happy tears, relief tears, can't believe it's real tears. The paperwork was simple back then. No bank inspections, no credit reports, just a handshake agreement written up by a lawyer. We moved in on a Saturday in November 1963. Everything we owned fit in the back of my pickup truck and our friend Jimmy's car. That first night in our own house, Betty and I lay on a mattress on the bedroom floor. We couldn't afford a bed frame yet, and listened to the house settle around us. Every creak, every whistle of wind through the windows, every sound the radiator made. It all sounded like music to us. I kept my promise to the Kowalskis. Every month on the 1st, I'd drive over to their house and hand Mrs. Kowalski an envelope with $250 in cash. They moved to Florida 6 months later, but I kept sending those payments to their new address. Never missed one, never even sent one late. We paid that house off in 4 years instead of the planned 5. Every time I got a raise at the garage, every time Betty picked up extra hours, every tax refund, every birthday gift from relatives, it all went toward paying off that house faster. We wanted it to be truly ours. In that little house, we learned how to be married. We painted every room at least twice, usually because we couldn't agree on colors the first time. We planted a garden in the backyard and learned that neither of us knew anything about growing vegetables. We had our first real fight about money in that kitchen, and our first real talk about children in that little living room. Our son David was born in 1965, our daughter Susan in 1967. They took their first steps on the hardwood floors that Mr. Kowalski had put in himself. They learned to ride bikes in our narrow driveway. They brought friends home from school to play in our tiny backyard. We lived in that house for 12 years. When we finally outgrew it and moved to a bigger place across town, we sold it for $38,000. That $12,000 investment had more than tripled, but the real return wasn't the money we made, it was the life we built inside those walls. I still drive by that house sometimes. Different family living there now, different color paint, different flowers in the garden. But every time I see it, I remember that young couple who took a chance on a handshake deal with strangers who believed in them. Here's what buying that house taught me. Sometimes the biggest risks feel the safest when you're doing them for the right reasons. We didn't buy that house as an investment or because someone told us real estate always goes up. We bought it because we wanted a place to build a life together. The Kowalskis taught us something else. They could have insisted on going through a bank, could have demanded a bigger down payment, could have chosen a safer buyer. Instead, they saw a young couple who reminded them of themselves 50 years earlier, and they decided to take a chance. Last year, I got a letter from Mrs. Kowalski's daughter. Mrs. Kowalski had passed away at 93, and while going through her papers, they found every payment receipt I'd sent her, organized by year in a shoebox. At the bottom of the box was a note she'd written, "Harold and Betty, good people who kept their word." That note meant more to me than any deed or title ever could, because it reminded me that buying a home isn't really about the money or the investment or even the house itself. It's about the promise you make to yourself, to your family, to the people who believe in you enough to give you a chance. Betty passed away 3 years ago, but we lived in 6 different houses over the years, each one a step up from the last. But we never forgot that first house, the one that taught us we could keep our word, build something together and make a life from nothing but determination and a handshake with kind strangers. If you're young and looking at houses that seem too expensive, or if you think you need to wait until everything is perfect, maybe think about this. The Kowalskis didn't sell us that house because we had enough money. They sold it to us because they believed we'd figure out a way to make it work. And you know what? We did. Sometimes the best investments aren't the ones that make the most money. They're the ones that teach you the most about what you're capable of when you really want something and you're willing to keep your word to get it. If this story brought back memories of your own first home, or if you're trying to figure out how to make home ownership work in your life, I'd love to hear about it. Share this with someone who might need to hear that sometimes taking a chance on yourself is the smartest financial decision you'll ever make. And let me know in the comments, what's the biggest leap of faith you ever took that turned out better than you expected? Sometimes sharing these stories reminds us all that the best things in life start with believing in possibilities, not just calculating probabilities.